Hey there, and thanks for tuning into episode 115 of the Eyes Free Sports podcast. My name is Greg Lindberg. Here on this episode, we are visiting with a gentleman who is originally from France and now resides in the great state of New York. And in addition to carving out a really interesting career, he is also a highly talented and accomplished adaptive athlete in both endurance sports as well as blind soccer. And I should mention that he was recently named co-captain of the U.S. blind soccer team. So let's get rolling now with episode 115 of the Eyes Free Sports podcast. All right, so my guest here on this episode of Eyes Free Sports is Charles Catherine. And Charles is a highly accomplished para-triathlete, in addition to being a co-captain of the U.S. men's blind soccer team, and all-around super cool and super accomplished guy. Charles, welcome to Eyes Free Sports.
Thank you, Greg. What an introduction, and it's a pleasure to be with you today.
Likewise, really appreciate you taking the time to chat. I know we've got quite a few things we can dive into here, so let's go ahead and kick things off here. So why don't we just start, Charles, just with your background as far as your early years. So I understand you were born and you grew up in France, is that correct?
Yes, and you might notice my French accent still. I've been in the US for 12 years, but I grew up in a part of France called Brittany, which is the west tip of France. And I studied political science in Bordeaux. I also lived in Sweden for a year. And then, I emigrated to the US, and the rest is history. Became a citizen actually last year. But growing up in France was, a lovely experience. And all my family, my parents and brothers are still in France today. So I go back quite often, and I very much have two identities, right? Two countries. And actually, even in blind sports, I represented France in triathlon, and now I'm representing the US in blind soccer.
Interesting. Yeah, I gotta believe that's fairly unique to represent multiple countries.
Mm-hmm.
So as far as your visual impairment, I'm curious, just talk to me about your visual impairment and your vision loss journey.
Sure. So I mentioned I have two brothers. They're older brothers, and one of them has RP like I do. And I say that because it made a huge difference in my life to have an older brother with the same disability. Nobody in my family has retinitis pigmentosa other than he and I. And so, I had a role model, somebody to look up to, and we're still very close. He's the godfather of one of my daughters, and someone I have a tremendous amount of respect and gratitude for. So for like most people with RP, I grew up visually impaired. Lost my night vision pretty early on, and I was, using glasses. I couldn't really read or do anything that involved actually team sports. I would play soccer, but just with my family and friends, never in a team sport environment. And
right.
Like going to the pool was a scary thing because I couldn't wear my glasses, so I would be very confused. And then progressively, I lost my sight. And as a teenager, I became legally blind, and then completely blind. No, I still have light perception, but I've been a B1, as we say in blind sports, for 2 decades now.
I see. Wow. I'm really curious just in terms of France and as far as like blind services, resources for the blind and visually impaired over there, having lived in the US now and compared to your experience growing up there with low vision, how would you kind of compare the two?
Yeah, it's interesting to think about. I think there's different approaches to disability. I think France still very much has what I would call a medical model, where we see disability as a medical condition and something that society sort of makes up for, and so we have tons of services and financial support from the government if we don't work, and special jobs that can be obtained as a visually impaired individual. I think I grew up right at the time when there was a transition in education between special education and mainstream education. And so I started in a school that was only for blind and visually impaired children, and then did my middle school and high school in mainstream. And that was a huge adjustment. And I think it was, for me, very beneficial. But for many of my friends, it was a tough transition. And I say that because I think the mentality about disability really changed in the US and in France around that time, right? In the late 90s, early 2000, thanks to people like Judy Heumann in the disability rights movement and the ADA and everything that came after that.
Sure.
And so I would say, though, that many of the people who were figures of authority, authority figures in my life, so my teachers, the people who were like career counselors and stuff, they still had a very old school approach to disability, and they would often tell me why I wouldn't be able to do certain things. I wanted to go to prep school, and they said, no, that's not a good idea. You won't be able to keep up with the level of reading that's required. Or, when I would see a career counselor, I would say, you could be a masseuse or a piano tuner, which are two very sort of stereotypical jobs in France for people who are blind or visually impaired. So I had to overcome that, and I am a bit of a contrarian, I must admit. And I think that fueled me to hear those people being skeptical, and I wanted to prove them wrong. And I think I did.
Right. Absolutely. I love your attitude and your take on that. That's awesome. So speaking of, France and then the US, definitely curious about your journey to the States, kind of what brought you over here and how that all unfolded.
It's something I think about every year. So I immigrated on May Day, so May 1st, and recently, celebrated the anniversary. And every year I try to do something very American to celebrate. So sometimes I go to like a Yankee game or eat a hot dog, and I do that because I think it's important for me to remember just what it was like on that day. And I literally went to Charles de Gaulle Airport in Paris with my luggage and flew here and just started my life here. And
wow,
at a time when I was really going through a lot of changes, all I had was an internship in a small startup that nobody had heard of, and nothing else, right? No plans, and that's something we do, right, when we're right out of college. And I'm really proud that I did that, but I also think I was very naive and completely underestimated all the difficulties that would arise with my mental health, with my adjustment to blindness, with my immigration status and paperwork and insurance and everything else, right? The cost of living in New York City, all those things. And so it made for challenging times for sure. And I think adaptive sports were actually a great way for me to channel some of that energy into something positive and regain self-esteem and a positive image of myself. And we can dive into that a little bit later. But that immigration is something that gave me, I think, a lot of empathy for people going through change and, not necessarily knowing what's on the other side, right? But happy I did it for sure.
Sure. Very interesting. And I appreciate your transparency and your openness about all that. So in terms of your career, before we do get into sports, definitely wanted to ask you about your career. I know you have a really interesting position currently, and just want to talk about that and your career achievements in general.
Yeah, so I'm the Director of Corporate and Government Relations for the National Organization on Disability, commonly known as NOD. And it's a place where I get to do two things that I love. One is advocating for change, and the other is more of a consulting role to companies who want to hire people with disabilities, and not just hire them, but also retain and promote them, and just create a more inclusive workforce. I think, Greg, it's important to remember that in America today, if you have a disability, you're twice more likely to be unemployed. And if you are employed, you will be likely underpaid. And in certain cases, with some minimum wage and 14C and things that are a little technical, but you can be paid pennies per hour and less than minimum wage. And I think that's the result of years of misconception on disability, and also lack of universal design and many things that we're addressing today, but it takes time to catch up, right? And there's still a lot of discrimination happening, a lot of wasted opportunities, really, both for individuals and for companies, because we know that with a more diverse workforce and diverse perspectives, we are better. We make better products. We make more accessible products for sure, but also just see things differently, right? No pun intended. And so I'm lucky to be in that role. I will say, though, for the longest time, I did not want to work in the disability field. I wanted to be seen as, mainstream, just like in school, and as I mentioned earlier. And it's only when I was at peace with my identity as a disabled individual that I felt comfortable doing that work at ND, because I think it resonated with me, and I was able to see the positives that came with that, and help others see the positive that came with that identity. So yeah, I'm very lucky to have this career. It's obviously very time consuming, so it makes all my other endeavors more challenging, but I have obviously an employer that's extremely aware of the importance of adaptive sports and really the symbol and the message that comes with adaptive sports and blind soccer right now, and all the positive things that will come with that.
Sure, absolutely. And hey, kudos to you and NOD. I know that's phenomenal work that you're doing, and super, super important work. Like you said, with the unemployment rates and whatnot, and which I know have really not changed in many years, over the course of many decades. So definitely hand it to you for that work you're doing there.
Thank you.
Yeah, so then in terms of sports, adaptive sports for the blind, just talk to me about how you were kind of introduced to this community and kind of your initial, foray into blind sports.
Yeah, I mean, it started for me with a New York City Marathon. So, when I was going through all this change in my life, and I was recently immigrated to the US, I went out one day in November just to check out the New York City Marathon. And I thought I would be out there for 5-10 minutes. And I stayed 3 hours in the cold, just cheering for people. And it was just a great experience. I love the New York City Marathon. And back then, I was not a runner. I was not an athlete. I actually resented athletes because it was a reminder of all the things I couldn't do, right? And I had all that negative energy associated with sports. Always been a sports fan, but never really an athlete. And that day, the people around me were like, there's lots of athletes with disabilities doing it, especially with Achilles International. I know you received many great athletes on this show, and honored to be a part of this. And one of them is Francesca, who's doing a great job with Achilles International in New York City. He and I were teammates for a long time. And so I joined Achilles as a runner. Well, first, just as a personal challenge, right? And that first day I ran, I think, 5 miles in Central Park, and I slept all afternoon. And it was really rough. Running is super hard at the beginning, and it's not the most rewarding, especially if you don't have the right shoes and the right everything. But what got me hooked was the community, the guides, the friends that I made through Achilles, and also all the other athletes who were like overachievers and people with disabilities who had great careers and things that I had never been really exposed to, except maybe for my brother, as I mentioned. And the fact that they were in the US, I started to have a network and dream bigger. And so I went every week, then twice a week. Then I started running every day. Then I was like, okay, so how about swimming? I should learn how to swim. And then my coach was like, you know how to bike? I was like, sure, yeah. So I started triathlons. And for 5 or 6 years, I trained 15 hours a week, and became very competitive in triathlon, and became the captain of the triathlon team and the leader of the Tri-Achilles team, which is a triathlon program for Achilles International. And I don't know, I traveled all around the world, and it was one of the greatest experiences in my life because I was just so proud of the work we were doing as a group, introducing people, people with all kinds of backgrounds, and people who just recovered from motorcycle accidents. It's not just visual impairments, right? It was all types of disabilities, which I love, because it reminded me also how little I knew about disability as a whole, right? I knew about visual impairment and my experience of it, but I knew nothing about what it was like to be an amputee or, wheelchair athlete, etc. And the team grew and keeps growing. Actually, now I still follow them, and I just had something to be proud of, something I was happy to share with my friends, and I could talk about my disability with pride. And so the rest is history, right? Once you have that, it's just the greatest motivator and the fuel that kept me going for a long, long time.
Yeah, very powerful. And I really like how you mentioned, starting out, just sleeping all afternoon after that first run, and how just in time and experience, it sounds like you really got immersed, and, the bug bit you and you never look back, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Interesting. So as far as triathlons, definitely curious, any places around the world that have been memorable where you've been able to compete?
Yeah. So I think first it gave me a chance to discover the US. We raced early in the season. We would go in Florida, sometimes California, because it's too cold to swim in like the New York area in April, March.
Yep.
And then once I got better and started to win, national races and stuff, I got recruited by the French team. And that was a really interesting experience because I was training only with American athletes. And so I was really not part of the French team. But they saw something in me, I guess, and they connected me with some of their guides. And Greg, those guides are athletes, like I am an amateur athlete. Those guys are professionals. Right. And having the chance to race with people like that and being on a tandem bike or tethered during a swim or a running race with people like that is just what I was always looking for. Feeling that power on the tandem and going speeds that I would never dream of was just so motivating. And so I would meet up with one guy in particular. His name is Sebastien. And Seb and I would meet up, 1 or 2 days before a race, say in Montreal. And I would travel with my tandem by myself, right? And people would look at me weird in the airport with this huge box, thinking, why is he traveling with a flat screen? Or I don't know what they were thinking was in that. Right. And meet with Seb. We would train for a couple of days, but he's such a pro and he has done this his whole life. So he knew right away, like what I would need and how to talk to me and how to motivate me. I need a lot of positive reinforcement. I'm not the guy that some people like tough coaches, but Seb was more of a kind coach, I would say, and it really worked with me. And, we did well together. I PR'd, I had my personal records with him always, because really it was cheating having him on the bike, right? It's so powerful. And he would, just find the right ways to motivate me. And, so we raced in Canada, France, the US. I never went to the Paralympics though, because as you know, in any sport, getting to the Paralympics is very challenging. In triathlon, there's only, I think, 12 athletes who get to go. And, they have to be from different continents. And so there's quotas for every country. And I just never made the cut. I was like right on the cusp. I was always between 10 and 20 in the world, and depending on my form and the form of others. And then the years when you're getting closer to, for me, it was Tokyo. well, the level just goes up. And some people just quit their jobs and train full time, and I just didn't do that. And I just never made that jump to the elite level. And so that's always been on my mind, right? I'm not a Paralympian. I hope I will be one day, but something that remains one of my goals on my bucket list.
Right, absolutely. So then transitioning to blind soccer. So I know, a lot of listeners out there probably know blind soccer is definitely a growing sport here in the U.S. USABA is doing an awesome job, developing teams around the country and programs and whatnot. And so I know that you're, like I mentioned at the top, currently the co-captain of the U.S. the national team for blind soccer. So let's just start at the beginning with blind soccer. How did you first learn about the sport and get involved?
So, as you said, it's very new and growing in the U.S. What happened in my case was a little bit surreal. Because I was on this USABA distribution list, for all blind athletes in the U.S. as a triathlete, I was receiving information, and sometimes they ask, what sport would you be interested in? And I saw blind soccer. I was like, is that a thing, in the US? and it wasn't, honestly. We had never had a national team. There were no programs that I knew of. And they had this combine and recruitment camps at the Olympic Training Center, or Elite Training Center now, they call it, I think, in Chula Vista. And so I went, and it was people from all walks of life, track athletes, judo athletes, ice hockey players, wrestlers, b-ball players. And we all sort of were learning about the sport. And even the coaches, they had soccer coaching experience, but never blind soccer coaching experience specifically. And so we all embarked on this wonderful adventure. And, I kept being called back camp after camp after camp. And I was obviously terrible at the beginning, Greg. I could barely, just running around a field when you don't see, without anybody tethered to you. When I run a marathon or a triathlon, I have a guide right next to me the whole time. In blind soccer, there are walls, there's other players, and we all want the ball. And it can be intimidating at first, especially if your dribbling skills are not tight and you don't really, the ball doesn't really go where you'd like it to go. So yeah, super, super humbling beginnings. And then, it became my new routine. What happened was COVID hit. And during COVID, I couldn't do triathlons anymore. I couldn't train. I couldn't run with a guide. I couldn't go to the pool. And it just, also I was burnt out, Greg, after not making the cut for Tokyo, and feeling a little bit like I had reached my maximum potential without quitting my job, right? I wasn't willing to go that next step. So I was ready to move on, and I thought I would just retire from sports. And then blind soccer started, and obviously I was in shape from triathlon, and so I have this endurance background, and just love the sport. As you know, France is a major nation when it comes to sided soccer. We actually have a decent blind soccer team as well, and if we play against them, it's going to be a very strange experience for me. But yeah, so for the past now 5-6 years, I've been training every day for blind soccer specifically. And, the fact that I'm a co-captain, I think, says more about my age than it does about my skills. But hopefully a little bit of both. I really love the group of people we've been able to put together. And it's just an honor, but also obviously a huge responsibility, because I became a U.S. citizen 2 years ago now, or more than a year ago. At that time, because of blind soccer. I think I would have become a U.S. citizen regardless, but it happened at that time because I wanted to be a part of this team. and I wanted to be on the field with those guys. And I owe everything to the US when it comes to blind soccer. So it's very, very special to be team captain now.
Right. In terms of just blind soccer, how it works, I know we have talked a little bit about it on this podcast on a few episodes, but if you just want to give your perspective, kind of an overview of how the game works, the rules, etc.
So it's a smaller field than sided soccer. It's usually 40 by 20, so half a field roughly. It's 5v5. So we have a sided goalkeeper and 4 players who wear a blindfold, mostly because we're all B1s, but some of us have light perception, and so we want to be on a level playing field. The ball has rattles, so when it moves, it makes noise. And on the sidelines, there's boards, so the ball never really goes out of play, kind of like in hockey. It could go out of play behind the goals, but not on the sides. And because our goalkeepers are sided, they guide the defense. The field is divided into 3/3. The defending guide is the goalkeeper, as I said. In midfield, it's the head coach. And then on the offensive side, we have a coach behind the opponent's goal who's guiding the offense. So there's a lot of communication happening because the players talk to each other as well. I think my number one apprehension when I'm on the field is head injuries, because we run pretty fast, sometimes with our head down. So we wear headgear to protect ourselves from concussions. And most importantly, if we do not signal our position when we're next to the ball, we say voy, a Spanish word for, I'm coming. It's a penalty. So safety is a key component of the game. And actually, the better we get and the more fit we are, I think the safer we are. Even though we play faster and harder, we are, because we're more clear-headed, and we know the rules, and we stick to those protocols. And so, yeah, it's a really exciting sport. But like in beep ball and other sports, I think for the crowd, it's a strange experience because they don't get to cheer as much as they would in a soccer match, because we need to hear the ball and the instructions. But of course, when we score, they do get to share that joy with us.
Right. I can definitely relate as a baseball player myself. There have been penalties, I know, against teams that have like fans cheering and whatnot during the games, just because it's such a, like you said, an auditory experience. Mm-hmm. And one little sound, oftentimes in beep ball, if there's like a big truck going by or a plane flying, they will pause the game just to, let that sound pass. And a lot of people do forget the importance of that. So any moments, any games that have stood out to you thus far in your blind soccer career?
I mean, we played last season. We played against Canada, and for me, it was the first time singing the national anthem and wearing the USA logo on my chest. And so, of course, that was just extremely emotional. And on top of that, it was, at the Olympic Training Center with a really friendly crowd and a lot of attention from local media. And it was just everything I could dream of. And our team did well. We won. And I think more importantly, we were very professional and we responded to what was asked of us. Now, I think looking forward though, we are a new program. We are a young team, inexperienced still compared to the elite level. And, we will be, the US will be hosting the Paralympics in 2028. And as a host country, we will have an automatic qualification spot. We will be one of the 8 teams playing in LA. And so that's really what we're training for. I mentioned that I've never been to the Paralympics. That might be my one shot to do that. And so that's what I think about every morning when I get up.
Right. Absolutely. That's got to be just super exciting, being on the ground floor of helping build this team, this new Paralympic team for the US. And the fact that we are, hosting the games in 2028. And just, I'm sure you kind of get chills kind of thinking ahead and envisioning how that's all going to be, right?
Yeah, I'm hoping to go to Paris in August to see the blind soccer tournament at the Paris Games, just to get a better idea of, what it's like, not just the level of playing, but also the experience as a whole, right? And of course, I would have loved to be there and qualify for those, but we need more time anyway, and I think we need to gain more experience through tournaments and friendlies, and it's really on the human side really interesting to see all those individuals from really all walks of life, as I mentioned, grow as humans, right, and as men. Some of them were teenagers when they joined the team, right, and I often get asked, how old do you have to be? And people listening probably wonder, could my children, or could I be part of this? Absolutely. USABA has a virtual combine, so you can take videos of yourself and displaying your skills, and reach out to the coaches, and maybe you'll get invited to training camps. We're always recruiting. I know you may not be close to a blind soccer program where you can train every day, but you don't necessarily have to be to be part of this. And then for coaches, we're also trying to build that capacity and having coaching courses that are available online for people who want to grow the sport and help be part of that movement, because we need more players. We need a larger pipeline. We need more, local tournaments, and I need people to share this passion for blind soccer.
Absolutely. Well said. And is there any kind of effort as far as a women's team coming down the pike?
I'm not super up to date in terms of where that exactly stands. I know there's definitely interest on the USABA side, but I think the issue there is both resources and also a pipeline of players. We already struggle on the men's side, and there's So yeah, I think that's definitely coming, and I'm excited to see that come to fruition. And also, I want to say, women are welcome to play with us as well. To at least grow their skill set, and we try to be very inclusive.
Absolutely, I appreciate you mentioning that. And I do know in general, at least some blind sports, adaptive sports out there are co-ed.
Mm-hmm.
So any ladies listening, listen to what he's saying here. It's there are opportunities for sure. So in terms of any other blind sports that you've had the chance to try, or that you might be interested in trying in the future, I'm curious.
Yeah. I there's one thing, once I have more time, that I really want to do is blind tennis. There's a cool program in Brooklyn, not far from me, so I'll check that out at some point. I think for me, I love cross training, so I keep swimming, obviously, for recovery, and cycling and running is part of my training. But outside of that, I've never tried baseball or beep ball. I played goalball growing up, so I've done some of that. But I have very limited exposure to other sports. Just because I've been so sort of laser focused on those two sports that are triathlon and soccer.
Sure.
But rock climbing is also something that I think is very cool to do, and a great guiding experience as well, I think, for my friends. And my brother is big into that, and I've done some of it. So that would be the one.
Nice. Yeah. And as far as blind tennis, I know there is an event coming up here in Florida this summer at the USTA, the U.S. Tennis Association location here in Orlando.
I mean, Greg, doesn't that sound so cool? Yeah. I mean, it sounds impossible. And
right.
But so does blind soccer, and it just, I love meeting those athletes, and we all have role models. For me, there's a few people who really had a big impact in my life. One of them is Brad Snyder. I don't know if you hosted him, but he's a fantastic guy. He's a swimmer, blind swimmer, and became a triathlete, and won gold in Tokyo. And having a chance and a platform like yours to highlight those stories, and blind tennis is a story that absolutely has to be told. And yeah, I'm just really curious to discover it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I have done a couple episodes on it, but definitely want to do more. And hopefully with this event coming up here that I do plan to attend, I can make more connections on that front.
Great. I'm going to go back and listen to those.
Awesome. I appreciate that. So I do understand, on top of everything else that you do, you have dabbled in music, and I'm definitely curious about your musical interests and achievements.
Growing up, because I didn't have really the courage to ask for help and do sports in a way that would be adapted, right, to my needs. Music was a good outlet for me, piano in particular, because that's pretty straightforward. Of course, I couldn't read sheet music, but I could just listen and repeat, right? And I had a great professor. I started with her when I was 4, and I stayed with her, my whole childhood and young adulthood. And it's something that to this day brings me joy and a release. Actually, in the cafeteria at the training center, when we are on training camps, there is a really out-of-tune piano that I love to play after a long day. Because you can imagine, those training camps, it's like go from 6:30 a.m. until 7, 8 p.m. And so having those 10, 20 minutes at the end of the day and just share that moment, and some of my teammates are great singers. So having that outlet is fantastic. It's something that I think would have liked to pursue, maybe professionally. But when we're talking about France and the old school approach to disability, because I couldn't really read sheet music, and I never really learned Braille for music purposes. I didn't have the academic background that would allow me to pursue this. And I think as a child, it was a frustration. I felt excluded, right? I couldn't be part of those prestigious programs, mostly because of my disability. And I think it's changing now. And, in New York City, I've been fortunate to play music with all kinds of individuals. And, there's a lot of great talent in here. I made beats for hip hop. I played classical piano with friends, and all kinds of influences. And so I was able to pursue my dreams, but there was always a small little frustration as well.
Right, absolutely. So before we do wrap up here, just a couple more things. So in terms of your message for anyone listening, I know you have kind of touched on this throughout our conversation, but any final words of encouragement, of motivation for anyone listening, as far as just the benefits of being involved in sports and recreation?
I think the number one benefit that we think of when we think about sports is health. And we think about losing weight or, cardiovascular health. But for me, it was mental health and a sense of purpose, a sense of pride. And I think to anybody who's going through tough changes and vision loss in particular, just go for a run, and if you're interested in soccer and blind soccer, trust me, it's never too late to start. I was, an adult when I started blind soccer, and it took me, a few years to get to the level that I'm at now. And with dedication and passion, you could really make a name for yourself. And so from the rec level, recreational level to, more competitive level, there's more and more outlets. So look on social media, friend me on Facebook, look at my Instagram, my teammates call me Daddy-O. I think because I'm sort of a dad on the team, and also maybe because I'm co-captain now. But so my Instagram name is Charles_Daddy-O. And there's a ton of resources out there for us, and unfortunately, a lot of it, as you probably experienced as well, Greg, is advocacy for ourselves, reaching out to local programs, making space for us, depending on where you are. I'm very fortunate to be in New York City, where there's a strong network of adaptive sports with Achilles and other organizations, but I know it's not always the case. But there's people out there who can connect you. So those are sort of my recommendations. And then if you're not visually impaired, but if you're an ally, whether you're a coach or a parent, please think about the coaching resources that I mentioned on USABA's website, but also there, there is a support system for you, and don't be afraid to ask children with disabilities, what sport do you do? Because just like any kid, we have those aspirations, right? And when I'm on the soccer field, I can see the child in me, if that makes sense, Greg. I can remember just how much I wanted to be on that pitch when I was watching France win the World Cup. And that's the best feeling in the world, right? And I want people to experience that at any level.
Sure. Absolutely. Alrighty. Well, again, we've been chatting with Charles Catherine here on this episode of Eyes Free Sports. And Charles, thank you so much for your time. Thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, and you offered some tremendous insight and perspective, not only on your life, but just blind sports, adaptive sports in general. And definitely wishing you the best of luck in terms of blind soccer, and super excited to follow the growth of that sport and the national team here in the U.S.
Well, thank you, Greg. I'll invite everybody to follow USABA on Facebook. They'll post, we can watch the games on YouTube and upcoming tournaments and all of that. So you can wish us good luck. And Greg, really thank you for telling those stories, not just the story of blind soccer, but all the sports that you featured on this podcast. I know it takes a lot of work. So thank you, because again, this is how the message will get through to people and change lives.
Absolutely. I appreciate that, Charles. That means a lot. To hear more episodes of the Eyes Free Sports podcast and to subscribe, search for Eyes Free Sports on your favorite podcast platform or visit eyesfreesports.com. Be sure to follow the Eyes Free Sports podcast at facebook.com/eyesfreesports and on Twitter @eyesfreesports.